we always talk about the second order impact. Because people are not going to work anymore, downtown areas are dying. So office space, commercial real estate, Sachs, you're in that, so you can comment on what's happening. And then restaurants and commuting and all the stuff that was happening downtown. San Francisco's downtown. Mayor London Breed had a press conference and she's been tweeting, hey, we have to revitalize, SoMa in San Francisco. That's never going to happen. That's off the table.
It's like Biden tweeting, we got to drop gas prices. It's
we have complete incompetence, but we'll get to politics, Chamath. Sachs, don't worry. We got plenty of politics for you. I'm just teeing it up. So there's your flop, gentlemen.
But on San Francisco real estate, I read an amazing statistic today from one of the major brokers. They said that by the end of the year, they're expecting 30 million square feet of office vacancy.
30 million.
In San Francisco by the end of the year.
San Francisco's tiny, by the way.
Because of subleases and then tenants rolling off. So the first thing I did is I tried to Google what's the total square footage in San Francisco, and I think it's about 75 million of office space.
Oh my Lord.
So you're talking about 40% vacancy by the end of the year. I've never heard of such a thing. 40%.
Let's be clear, San Francisco is fairly unique and a bit of an outlier in the circumstance because so much of it was, tech heavy and so much of it went remote.
Yeah.
And the city collapsed and it all got crime. But generally that's not the case. I mean, New York is apparently still pretty stable, right? And Miami's obviously doing well. LA, Austin.
But here's the piece of it that people aren't really thinking about, which is the only reason it's stable is because tenants sign up for long-term leases. And this is why it turns out that WeWork was a pretty bad business model, is because if all your leases are month to month and you hit a recession, your revenue gets whammied. This is why landlords like long-term leases with credit-worthy tenants. They sign 7 years, 10 years, and so on.
And letters of credit, right?
Right.
Put a year down.
So what that means, though, is that as these tenants start to roll, their leases roll over the next few years, they don't need as much space because they've either gone remote or they're hybrid now. And so they're thinking of their office less as a headquarters, which everyone needs to go to, and more as a co-working space that their employees occasionally go to. So they're all reducing their footprints. This is why San Francisco keeps increasing its vacancy, is that as more and more of these leases roll, there's just no need, they don't need as much space. So they're also downsizing. Now here's the problem is that these buildings have debt on them, right? And that debt has what's called a debt service coverage ratio, DSCR. And basically you as a building owner become in default on your debt covenants if your revenue from the building drops below a certain number. And here's the problem. All these new leases that get signed, to the extent there are any, they're going to be at a fraction of what the old leases were because this vacancy is going to create a massively low market clearing price.
Am I right to understand that they're not allowed to sign those leases because they're under it? So can the landlord take it as better than nothing, or do they are not allowed to take it?
It's not that. It's just that the market clearing price is going to be so much lower than their old leases that when they then look at the revenue from the building, and by the way, that building's going to have a lot of vacancy on it now, they're just not going to be able to hit their debt service coverage ratio. So they will be in default. What that means is, I don't understand how in a place like downtown San Francisco, half the buildings don't end up getting owned by the banks. Well, the banks don't want to own all these buildings, so it's going to be a fire sale. But I don't know who the buyers are going to be.
I mean, they just have to convert it, right? I mean, that's the only thing. They got to convert these to residential because we have a housing crisis still. That's the only way out. That
takes years and years. And that's a repositioning play. First, you need the cooperation of the city government, which isn't going to happen. Then you need developers to come in and have the capital to basically make all those changes. Again, it takes a long time, but think about the systemic risk from that, right? If you know that a huge chunk of the real estate is the commercial real estate in downtown San Francisco, which used to be blue chip. I mean, the most blue chip, right?
Yes.
Who are those financial institutions who own those assets? Because they are now toxic assets, and they will be revealed to be toxic assets as soon as the leases roll. Well, and then there are debt funds and banks as well, right? And so what are the cascading effects when those shoes start to drop?